Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Relationship Schools podcast here. I'm your host, Jason Gaddis, and I'm grateful to be here, as always. And I'm just really psyched to continue to move our culture forward around this conversation of love and connection and long-term partnership. So thanks for being with me on the ride. If you're new, welcome. If you're returning, good to have you here. Thanks for sharing this with a friend and having engaging discussions about some of these episodes. That's an action step that you can always do is, hey, friend, listen to this podcast and let's talk about it. And then you can have an intimate glass of wine or coffee or tea and really talk about it and get in there and have a real, honest, frank conversation about the subject matter. Today's topic is going to be extremely provocative, and you're going to want to have a conversation about this one. It's my friend Kimberly Johnson, who runs MAGA Mama and the MAGA Mama podcast. She's an author who's written the book, The Fourth Trimester. She's writing her next book now, which she'll mention. And this woman is a force. She's extremely active on social media. You'll make sure you want to stay tuned to the end to follow her on the social media channels. She'll share what those are. They're also in the show notes. She's a very accomplished practitioner of really the healing arts. She's done everything from Rolfing certification to sexological bodywork training, somatic experiencing training, tons of yoga trainings and retreats. She's was one of my first yoga teachers back in the day here in Boulder. She studied with Richard Freeman at the yoga workshop. So needless to say, she's got a lot going on and is just really full of wisdom here. So I think you're going to dig this. She's got a beautiful story, trauma and triumph, and everything in between. So I think you're going to appreciate what's going on here. We talk about sex. We talk about women mostly and their empowerment through the nervous system. So if you're a woman listening, I think you're going to get a lot of value here in terms of what you've been through in your life, from sexual trauma to birth, if you're a mother. And I think the guys, you're going to also get a lot of value here based on what you can learn from women. Okay, so I think this stands to be a really, really helpful episode, and it's going to make you think, okay, which is my job, to challenge your thinking, maybe stretch your mind a little bit, and perhaps have you take action on something in your life that will help improve your relationships. So let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Kimberly Johnson.
Thank you.
Yeah, good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Kimberly, we've known each other, I think I first met you 2000 and maybe 5-ish, when Ellen, my wife, girlfriend at the time, encouraged me to go to the yoga workshop. I think that's where I first met you. You were one of the yoga teachers there. Is that right? Do you remember that?
I don't remember the first time that we met, but that sounds definitely plausible as a theory. Okay. I feel like I met you at the Boulder Co-op once before that, but yeah. I can't remember if that was Ellen telling me about her meeting with you, or if there was another time that I met you at the Co-op. But I think that's what I remember.
Okay, got it. Yeah, and I went to many of your yoga classes back in the day. So thank you for being one of my first yoga teachers.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So who are you? I just read your bio, but could you, for the listeners that might not know you or have heard from you, could you just give us a 1 or 2 minute intro? Like who are you? What are you up to in the world?
Sure. Well, I primarily help women heal from birth injuries and sexual boundary ruptures. And I do that through a combination of somatic experiencing, trauma resolution work, together with sexological bodywork. So I do hands-in work. But as I'm talking in the present moment, actually, I'm not doing that specific one-on-one work right now. I've been on a bit of a sabbatical for about a year from that, because I'm teaching big group classes, helping women restore sympathetic responses in their nervous system, which just means coming out of freeze and saying the things they couldn't say, doing the things they couldn't do, and just learning how to be more fully in their bodies and connect to pleasure, connect to power, Another huge part of my life is I'm a single mom. So I have an almost 12-year-old daughter. So that's a huge part of my path. I kind of work at the intersection of sex, birth, and trauma, and try to teach the trauma people more about sex and birth, and try to teach the birth people more about sex and trauma, and so on. And then I'm also, just for someone who's not in a committed relationship, I'm just it's very important to me that I help men and women understand where each other are coming from, because I find that when it's abstracted a little bit beyond personality and we start to understand how nervous systems work, a lot of the shame and the self-loathing start to lift, and people can really understand, oh, this is like my system impacting the other person's system. It's not them rejecting me. It's the energy behind it. And so that was a big focus of my first book, which is called The Fourth Trimester. And people would even say, like, why you have, like, women give birth, why is there so much information on relationship? But it's because relationships have there's a huge, like a 67% marital satisfaction decline in the first year after the first child. And so just as someone whose relationship fell apart at that time and never came back together, I just really feel strongly about couples maintaining their bond and getting stronger through parenting.
Yeah, huge. Thanks for doing that work. We're going to get into the nervous system here in a minute, but just I want to ask you a couple of questions about how you got into this. Like, explain to the listener, like, I think most of our listeners, there's a lot of therapists and coaches that listen, so many people might know what somatic experiencing is. It's trauma resolution, Peter Levine's work. But in terms of like sexological body work, I know you're also a Rolfer yoga teacher in your past. So like, what led you to going deeper into trauma work and sexological body work? Like that's some pretty intense terrain.
Well, what happened was a few things. One of them, I had a baby. So I had a baby and everything changed. And my whole toolbox, I thought I was like, had so many tools with, yoga, and my yoga teacher, Richard Freeman, taught everything was from the pelvic floor. So I knew all about my pelvic floor. I talked about people's pelvic floors all the time.
Yeah.
And then I had a huge tear in my own pelvic floor and I couldn't figure out how to heal myself and I couldn't get any help. So I didn't know where to go for help. I would Google, holistic postpartum, alternative postpartum, and all that would come up was postpartum depression. And I felt depressed, but I didn't feel like medicine was going to help. I felt like figuring out how to heal my pelvis was going to help because I had all the symptoms that people don't want. I had incontinence and like tons of pain in my lower back and my sacrum and all these things that I had no idea were potential outcomes of having a baby, just zero idea that this was even possible. And going into it really being like, I'm healthy. I do yoga all the time. I swam in the ocean while I was pregnant. I'm having sex, thinking I'm like doing everything right, and then end up with this injury. So then when I started talking to other women, I just could not believe how common my situation was. I mean, my situation was a bit extreme, but like everyone that I talked to had some kind of challenge, whether it was breastfeeding or diastasis or difficulty coming back to sex, but they don't know why. And I hadn't really been having those conversations because in my yoga path, I really came from the Krishnamacharya lineage. And my women yoga teachers, most of them, because I was studying at a really high echelon, didn't have kids. So they were women just like in any other professional world where they were achievers. And so they opted out of children. So I didn't really have anyone to go to who was a spiritual practitioner and on a yoga path that also knew about things about being a woman.
Yeah.
So once I started talking to other women, everyone was like, oh yeah, my tailbone's been hurting for 3 years. What happened 3 years ago since I had a baby? Oh, my lower back's been hurting for 15 years. Oh, what happened 15 years ago? I had a baby. And so because I was already a Rolfer, and we work in noses and mouths, but we don't work in genitals, probably just because of legality's sake and because of all the moral parts of it. I started realizing like, this is crazy. Like if someone's a tailbone is a structural thing. It is a bone. It can move. I thought, okay, well, do you want me to try? Like, because they'd be like, no one's ever worked on me. I'm like, okay. And so I just was brave and thought, okay, I'll just try, put on some gloves. And then I would, in 30 minutes, 40 minutes, their tailbone would stop hurting and it would never start hurting again.
Wow.
So I just was like, oh my God, this is just like uncharted territory that people don't want to go into.
Yep.
And I'm kind of a cliff diver by nature. So I was like, fuck it, I'll do it. And I didn't really care about legality, and I didn't really care. I was just like, people need help, I'll help them. And I was living in South America at the time. So it was also, I didn't have to worry about it so much. But then I went and taught a yoga training, and 2 people in the training had what some people would call a Kundalini awakening, and some people would call like dural unwinding. And I realized that my system was provoking it, because they would tell me, this has never happened to me outside of sex. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe this just happened. And I didn't really know what I was doing. So I was like, okay, so something about me is creating a space where this happens, but I don't really, other than like space holding, I don't have any skills to help this person through this. I don't know if this is positive, not positive. I don't know if this is helping them or not helping them. I better figure out what's going on. If this stuff's going to start happening, energy, whatever, I better figure out what it means. And in my own system, I'd been having those kinds of things happening, but I knew I could stop it if I needed to. And I was just kind of letting it happen. So then I also working in people's pelvises, there's just so much stuff that we store in our pelvises. Yeah. And I was like, okay, isn't very responsible if I don't have more training specifically on helping people with trauma and helping people. The sexological bodywork training was fantastic. And I did it because I wanted to. I think I did it as much for myself, for unshaming, because we just have so much unconscious shame. Yeah. And also for me, it was a lot about being around male genitals, because I needed to be in environments where that it was more normalized and that it wasn't scary for me. Mm-hmm. And I felt again, like, okay, if this is the territory that you're going to live and work in, then I need to have as many skills. But it was also a legality thing, because in California, if you are a sexological bodyworker, it's legal to work with genitals, because otherwise the work I do is illegal. Like I'm moving to New York in a couple of weeks, and it's illegal there. Oh, wow. So I could be turned in for being a sex worker, and I could be prosecuted as a sex worker for helping women.
Intense. That's fucked up. Okay.
Yeah. So the regulations are really strict. So that's why I did those things, because but honestly, somatic experiencing, it's my lineage, right? Like I come from Rolfing, and Peter Levine was also a Rolfer. He was studied with Dr. Rolf for a year at Esalen from 69 to 70. If you ask Peter where he learned about body reading and readings, he'll say Dr. Rolf taught him more than anyone. Yeah. So it was kind of a natural progression, because just like when I took Rolfing training, all of a sudden I understood yoga in a completely different way and anatomy in a completely different way. When I took SE, it was like all of a sudden I understood everything else that I had been doing and why certain things worked and didn't work. But the magic thing is that really up until that point, I was still underwater in terms of what I would call like healthy regulation. So I was still using all those practices to like peek my head above water every once in a while. And then I was mostly underwater. Even though I had done EMDR developmentally, I had done so many different kinds of therapy, I was really only doing those. They were serving as like palliative measures and arguably also, creating healthy attachment and all that stuff. But when I did my first SE session, I was like, holy shit. I was pissed, because I'm like, I can't believe that this is the first time, because it worked so much better than I could tell. I didn't even know what was happening, of course, because you don't. You're like, something just major really happened. I have no idea what, but like, damn, that was effective in a way that like nothing I've ever done is effective. Cool. So that also just, really put a fire under me to go deeper into it. Yeah, that's amazing. I love hearing about kind of the putting the pieces together of your own journey and how you sought out, your own help and tried to find the teachers and mentors and solutions, to your own issues that you couldn't find otherwise. So inspiring. Yeah, that was the fruit of the first book, really, because it took me 6.5 years to heal myself after having a baby. And when I say heal, I mean like I could do what I wanted with my body. I could have sex without pain. I I felt like my life force was mine again. And so because it was so hard for me to put all those pieces together, that's why I wrote the book, so that other women, it would be easier for them to put those pieces together. And, it's not ideal. I did not have the things that I'm suggesting in my own book, like a postpartum plan. I didn't know to do that, which is why I even wrote the book. Like, I had no idea that it was even something special. But I do know that healing takes longer, and recovering, whatever recovery means to each person, but like coming back to wholeness after having a baby, whether you're a mother or a father or whatever you are, it takes a lot longer than we want it to.
Yeah.
And we think it should.
Yeah.
So it's important that people know that it's an ongoing process.
Yeah. It's a journey. Yep. Okay. I want to talk about the nervous system a little bit. And you said something before the call, I think, before we hit record, about being in sympathetic arousal, and how you also are helping women, specifically women, come out of that, right? And to learn to work with their nervous system in a different way. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then we can maybe weave in men and the importance of men being a part of that or not.
Yeah. So, what happened inadvertently for me is that I spent about 3 years and did 800 sessions with women on birth stories and sexual boundary ruptures. So wow. I got kind of this like incubation period. And what I learned in that time, which really surprised me, was, because I come from this somatic experiencing background, and most of the women were coming to me with stories of being victims in some way, right? They were, their doctor didn't listen to them, their midwife didn't listen to them, or they just weren't able to say what was inside of them. They went into a freeze state and they lost all capacity to advocate for themselves. So many variations of freeze states, basically. And I realized that over that period of time, there were a lot of commonalities. And, as we do, practitioners who are like, in service, I was like, I can't keep seeing people one-on-one because my waiting lists were getting absurd. Like New York, I have 120 person waiting list. And I started getting real overwhelmed. Like, shit, I want all these people to get help, but I can't do it. I can't do it all. And I can't even train people fast enough. So what could I offer to everyone that would help this phenomenon? And the way that I discovered it was because I had a woman come in my office, and she was wearing, so I used to work in a dome, and she looked like she was dressed to go to like the Saharan desert. She was like wearing sunglasses and a head wrap and a scarf, a hat and long sleeves. And it was summer. And so I live in Southern California. And she started telling me that she just was like afraid to be outside, that after her third child, she just felt like really overly exposed, that her friends her whole life have joked with her that she's always incognito. And I started to realize, like, wow, she's really far on the prey spectrum of her nervous system. Like she is basically camouflaging herself and in hiding. And she was at a point where she didn't want to sleep in the same bed as her husband. She didn't want to even sit next to him on the couch. And like everything just seemed like too much stimulus. So, I still am a young practitioner. So I'm trying things out, experimenting. And I thought, okay, well, let's be like the wolf and the rabbit. And I figured, she'll want to be the wolf because she's already in rabbit mode. So like she'll want to be the wolf. Well, I say the word wolf and rabbit, and I say, do you want to be the wolf? And she starts to shake and tremble and then get down and crouch down. And we were both standing up, and she's like, and she's a pretty aware person. She's like, I don't even know what's going on right now. She's like, I don't even know why I'm doing this or what's going on. And she went into a full freeze. Like she became a statue. So I just went over to the side of her and waited and gave her some touch and whatever. But through that process, I was like, okay, now I get it. She actually cannot be the predator, even in her imagination. So if you can't even occupy that side of your nervous system in your imagination, you're definitely not doing it in your daily life.
Right.
And because then I would be like, okay, we're at the watering hole. It's neutral. Nobody eats anybody. Like we just hang out here.
Yeah.
But even that was like too much. I developed a process step by step to restore those healthy sympathetic movement. So one thing that I try to help people understand, because it's really gotten mixed up in our parlance, because everyone talks about the saber-toothed tiger. I don't know if you've noticed that, but like every talk, the saber-toothed tiger comes up. We've mixed unhealthy sympathetic arousal with healthy parasympathetic. So when the system is not under threat, then our sympathetic system is what drives us to act. It's our motivation. It's what leads us through the world to move. And when we're not under threat, our parasympathetic is rest and digest, sphincter, release and opening. But we have it in our head that sympathetic is fight or flight and parasympathetic is rest and digest. So we've mixed the functions. So when women start to understand, okay, so in the sympathetic branch, you have fight or flight, which fight is go towards the threat and flight is go away from the threat. I really basically figured out that most women had a lot of those responses in a situation where it was unacceptable, either because of their social conditioning, like you just have to be nice and polite and conflict is way too threatening because of the social engagement part of the system. Or because they were in a parenting relationship as a child where they were really dominated and their voice wasn't heard. And so they just were accustomed to they hadn't really practiced that circuitry. And so I realized that the sort of, I guess, fastest way to do these repairs was to get to the frozen parts, shake them loose, and then complete those movements, whether it was like kicking a doctor. Some women's, their leg would just start to hurt. And then it would be like, does your leg have something it wants to do? And it would be like, yeah, it wants to kick. And then of course, most women aren't going to actually kick their doctor in the moment because they know that might make them get worse care or whatever, but their body had that impulse. And then, so when they would actually complete the impulse, they would, sometimes women who had what's called vaginismus, which is like a vagina that squeezes tightly shut and you can't put anything in it, they would just release. All of a sudden, their pelvis would just open. Because their genitals were, if of course the most vulnerable part of you is it's a sphincter closed, which is a quote unquote unhealthy sympathetic response, but actually an incredibly adaptive one.
Yeah, intelligent.
It's a good idea to do that.
Absolutely.
In the past it was, but in the present. So I worked to help people eliminate those like residues from the past and come into the present. And usually that is what helps people become more responsible for their own responses.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's so empowering, right? I mean, I just talked to Stephen Porges about this in terms of the social engagement system.
I was just talking to Stephen.
Just Steve and I were just hanging out.
Yes, well. Okay, well, I don't know if I have anything to contribute with Stephen, but
it's so cool that you're, again, through your own experience here, that, to me, you're talking kind of Steve's language about the social engagement system, right? Like that's healthy. What you're calling healthy sympathetic arousal is being able to act and engage and turn toward people and calm someone down if there's a threat coming, right? And then at a certain point, then I go higher sympathetic or I go parasympathetic. If it's a total like shutdown response, right? Yeah. So you're saying you're helping women primarily, it sounds like, complete the action that wasn't complete by addressing the freeze response.
Yep, pretty much. Okay. Shaking loose the freeze response. But what I do want to say is I'm not going into the eye of the hurricane. Like I'm not asking people to go into the worst experience of their life and do something. I'm just dealing with what's arising in the present moment. So when I'm teaching right now, I have 270 people in a group class online, and I'm showing them different, for instance, different breathing patterns. A fight breath sounds really different than a flight breath. So if I were to do those right now, each of them would ping your nervous system in a certain way. Yeah. And what that means, I know what I think it means for me, but I don't necessarily know what it means for you, but it might lead to a cascade of responses in your system. Totally. And the guy sitting next to me and the guy sitting on the other side of me, we're all going to respond a little differently based on our history and our nervous systems and whatever kind of animal we are inside, right? Definitely.
Okay. And I mean, so empowering and awesome. How can, just one tip maybe for the listener, is there anything they can do on their own to move this a little bit?
Yeah, I'm loving all the kinds of new breath work that's sort of arising right now. I personally love to do Wim Hof breath, but that's because my system is parasympathetically dominant. So part of what I'm bringing forward in my work, and this is stuff that I learned from my mentor, Ellen Heed, is that we all have a propensity towards one of the sides of the nervous system based on our connective tissue. Wow. So if you are born with your genetics and you have more elastic connective tissue, you are more predisposed to have a parasympathetic nervous system response because your tissue the fibers are wider apart, right? If you are sympathetically wired, then you are more likely to have sympathetic response because there's less distance
space,
that the fibers have to go to. And a sympathetic response requires either like flexor system activation or back body activation, right? So, and the parasympathetic response is a disorientation, confusion, collapse, which, they're just predisposed to it for parasympathetic dominance. So in that case, because there's a spectrum. Some people are just right in the middle. They have sort of an equal amount. And then some people are like really collagenous and some people are really elastinous. And I fall on the spectrum maybe at like the 20% mark. And I confirmed this. I told my theory to Tom Myers. It's not really a theory. Well, yeah, I guess it is. And he pinched my skin and then he like touched me and he was like, yeah, you're right. You're about 20%. So at least he agreed with my self-assessment. But the point of it is that basically also we haven't taken into, at least I haven't seen it much in the literature, taking into account gender and hormones in sympathetic, in nervous system responses. So estrogen is a bonding hormone. At the social nervous system layer, estrogen is basically, it's like what makes you give a fuck about stuff. It's why women who go through menopause all of a sudden like move to Santa Fe and get divorced because they're just like, peace, I'm just going to go do my own thing. I don't want to, I'm like, not worried about all of you and feeding you and everything. So the estrogen, the social nervous system is what tells us if we belong. It's what tells us if we fit in. And it's also the fawning response. So it's why women go back to threats. It's why we repeat something or stay in an abusive relationship because it's a safety mechanism. A known threat feels safer than a wandering threat out there. Yeah. So it's actually another adaptive response. There's
got to be shame that you're also dealing with in here.
Hugely. I think that's why your work, my work, Kelly Brogan's now doing, she's helping people taper off psych meds in groups on Facebook, is because it's hitting at this cultural moment where we're trying to figure out how to do community. We're trying to figure out what that means now. And we need each other so that we don't feel that we're so wrong because we're so different because we're the only one. So when we come together, it's huge. It's huge to hear. Huge. Oh, I'm not. And the bizarre thing is, and I felt this so many times in my life, because when I first wrote my book, my situation was kind of dramatic, I guess, like I went to another country and I fell in love. And then, less than a year later, I've got a baby in a new language and a new guy. And, and then, so I think even my publisher was like, maybe less of your story because who's going to really relate to that? That's so out. But actually, it's like everyone can relate to some part of it. Everyone relates to, oh yeah, I was so many women, I was with someone from a different culture or this or that. And the same thing, I had a guru experience, which is also part of what led me to this work, is I ended up studying with a guru and there was a lot of amazing parts of it. And I was his only student. And then he wanted to be sexual and he wanted the relationship to go farther than what I thought the relationship was about, which was about learning and Sanskrit. But it was an Advaita Vedanta training. So he had kind of like built my whole philosophical framework at that point, which is kind of like brainwashing. and telling me that I wasn't a real student. If I wasn't like, I was drawing these lines, then I'm not really that devoted. Like I'm not a true sadhaka if I won't let him touch me, because it's just the body. And like what the body's no different. It's a projection of the cosmic mind. So why do I have all these hangups? So through the process of going through these experiences myself, I forgot what we started with, but
I got it. I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
And going through that process, would you just complete that
unshaming.
Thought? Yeah.
Yeah.
The shame.
So when I came back from India, you know, I was a wreck, and my parents have always been really supportive. So, but really it was like, I thought I was going to have to have a secret inner life, because who could relate to that? Right. I thought like, I felt like I'm like the dumbest person on earth, and everyone's going to think like, you're so smart. Like, why would you get in that situation? And then it seemed so far out. But my dad had this wherewithal. At the time, he was working with these healers from Durango, actually, and they were in town. So he brought me to this circle. And in the circle, there were two other people, one of them who had his entire family at an ashram, and they had all been abused. And he was the father, and he was dealing with like the tremendous shame of like not protecting his family.
Yeah.
But this thing that felt like it was impossible for anyone to relate to, and it must be the reason why I'm actually the most fucked up person on the planet, became this thing that's like not that different than so many other people. And as you know, as a therapist, and now I've worked with so many people, it's not that unusual of an experience.
Yeah. No,
a lot of people have, if it's not a guru, it's definitely some kind of power dynamic that gets really complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate here. How many women have been, you know, either assaulted or you know, been taken advantage of in some way, right?
Totally.
Very common.
And I when I learned about the nervous system, and I learned about my own like connective tissue density, and then so I already came in with an elastic nervous system, more elastin in my connective tissue. Then I was pulled out at birth by forceps. So it wasn't really my own impulse that allowed me to be born. I was pulled out, and I was 42 weeks. So I was 2 weeks, quote unquote, late. And then I couldn't, quote unquote, nurse, and I didn't like my mom's milk. And so I was given all these formulas, and then I was an intense baby, crying all the time, probably because whatever. I was like,
we have some similarities. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I just did a rebirthing training, and it was really helpful to put some of these pieces together, because it's always been very hard for me to find my sense of my own rhythm. Mm-hmm. And I realized it was like I got pulled out, and then at the same time, I was really smart. So I got pushed ahead in school. So I skipped second grade, and I was already early because I was a June birthday. So when I went to third grade, I was in a third, fourth combination, and I was 6. And so I was with 8 and 9-year-olds. So at that point, I was just basically like, well, clearly I don't belong, and I don't know what the fuck is going on. I was like the one who told the teacher when there was tests, and I was just trying to be good from a 6-year-old point of view. I didn't understand the 8 and 9-year-old rules, you know?
Right.
And then from there, I had a mom she's fantastic, and she's totally sympathetically dominant, and she is a steamroller. She is like, I mean, she gets what she wants, and there's no reason to have an opinion, because her opinion's just going to rule out. Like, do you want your room painted purple or yellow? I'd like it purple. Okay, we'll do yellow, like that. So I just learned to not be that, and just super flexible.
Right.
And then from there, I went to high school, and I had a group of guys that tormented me. I went to a school from 7th to 12th grade. From 7th grade to 11th grade, every day or so when I went to school, I would have a group of guys screaming fire crotch across the lawn.
Oh, man.
And so I would like cringe, and I would like avoid them and everything. By the time I got to college, I was 17, younger still than everyone else. I got asked out 3 times in the first week. I had no idea what to do. I was like, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. I don't know, like, what does that make me if I go out with each person? I had zero practice. And then I got sexually assaulted because I just had no framework for listening to my intuition, for what's my criteria for being sexual with someone. I come from an alcoholic family, so I've never really drank. But like there was some conflict there about, well, is that really normal or not normal? And is it okay for me to have standards there?
Wow.
And then, so the guru experience for me was kind of like, to me, it felt like it was the most subtle. It was the most, because the other ones, I also was, my college professor, the day that I graduated, called me into his office and then came on to me and threatened me and said he wouldn't write my grad school recommendations if I wouldn't be with him.
God.
And so I was just like, well, I guess there goes that. Because he was I had transferred schools because of the sexual assaults. I had transferred colleges, and he was the person that I had taken the most courses with. And he was like from Princeton, and like, he's the one that was really going to be able to write me the recommendations that mattered. And I was just like, well, there goes that future, because I'm not doing this. So the amazing thing, now I'm writing this second book, and as I'm writing it, it's like totally different than the first one, because the first one I'm writing about what I wished I would have had, like what I know women need based on kind of what I didn't have.
Yeah.
But now I'm writing a book about what I've lived, and like, I feel like what I've healed. If I'm writing from the place of like, now I do have access to full sexual expression. Now I do have access to what I call jaguar energy, which is basically that you have access to your full spectrum of your nervous system. It doesn't mean being an alpha female. It doesn't mean being hyper aggressive. Jaguars aren't hyper aggressive. They activate their full system when they're hunting or when they want something, and then they chill out and play with their cubs and lay over tree branches and relax because they can, because they know that when they need that full activation, they can just count on it being there. So when we do this work and we activate some of those more, we do a lot of growling and showing fangs, and a lot of women can do this. They can do the rabbit movement, but they can't do the incisor. So even it was hard for me when my friend told me to make like an angry face or whatever. And then I saw the picture and I was horrified. I was like, I look like a kid trying to be angry. Like, what the fuck? I can't even actually look angry when I'm trying to look angry. So I've noticed that's true for a lot of women, because there's scientific research. All of the female presidential candidates right now, I guarantee you, they are getting coached on how not to look angry, because the ratings go way down if women express scorn or disgust,
for sure,
or anything that's like
so not socially cool and attractive,
right? But so necessary.
And
it's not like I go around the world. It's like I'm a very polite person, but it's not the point. The point is that I know, and it's happened to me. Like at Halloween a couple of years ago, someone came up right behind me, and I like turned around with my hands and like growled, and my daughter didn't even feel or see the person, and then she goes, "Whoa, jaguar," because she saw that it was just, and I'm sure you can relate, because so much of your work comes from being outdoors and what nature has to teach us. But I feel like it's so important on every level that we learn to walk among the animals and be the animals that we are.
Yeah. Okay, I gotta interrupt just because I have so many questions. And I'm aware of the time. So, are you saying that as you kind of told this section of your life story, from being in grade school and skipping grades and being kind of flexible in your nervous system, are you attributing, I know there's a lot of variables here in a person's life path, but are you saying that your nervous system has a big part in how you specifically are wired has sort of played out in your life the way it's played out is because of your nervous system and its sort of setting? Does that make sense?
I'm saying that those things stacked on each other to create, or I didn't even mention, at 13, I became a vegetarian. Worst choice for someone who has connective tissue like mine, because again, I'm not getting the collagen. So we tend towards things that we're already good at. So I became a yoga teacher. Of course, I didn't become a sprinter because I suck at running.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that it didn't cause it, but because of those, those things, they layer on each other and become more likely that you end up in that situation.
Exactly. Okay.
Or like someone who's premature. Like somebody wrote me a woman in my class, and I need to maintain anonymity, but I mean, essentially if you're born really early and you live in the hospital and machines are what keep you alive, because you're not even a fully formed material being yet, of course you're not going to have an incredible level of sovereignty over your own body.
Right.
From the get-go.
Right.
Now, does that mean that in the future bad things are going to happen? No, but it means that if you also happen to have a lot of elastin in your connective tissue, and then there may be other factors that come in, that it's not surprising that you would end up in a parasympathetic freeze response,
More
right? Because everyone's everyone's going, why am I like this? Why am I like this, right? Part of the shame thing. Why me? And so it's not to give some, it's like, oh, okay, well, this just gives me some information. So for instance, for me, lifting weights is actually a really good idea because it builds a kind of flexor strength that I don't quote unquote naturally have. So it balances me.
Yeah. So
and it gives me energy.
Right. And is this where you also, for you, the Wim Hof, and for those that don't know, the Wim Hof method is like you basically submerge yourself in ice cold water in a bathtub or a lake or whatever, and you relax, right? Because that actually gives you energy. Something like that?
Well, that's a whole other thing. So the Wim is the breathing. So we do like some people call it power breathing. So like, so any kind of mouth breathing is going to be more upregulating. It's going to make you more sympathetic. So we do rounds of that. And I see other people who are already sympathetically wired, and some of them are like passing out because it's just way over threshold for their system.
Yeah.
But I'm so parasympathetic that sometimes I have to sit up while I'm doing it. Otherwise I'm like yawning and I just like can't even stay with it. But then the ice, it's different for everyone. But for me, I realized, okay, from really early on, I was freakishly good at it. I was like scaring people because I was staying in for like 15 minutes in 32-degree water.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, I get it. Because freeze is a known entity to me.
It's comfortable for me.
Comfortable. Just like meditation, right? It's like, oh, now I'm in a freeze state, but it's freeze and positive rather than freeze and negative. So it's a little bit better, but I'm replicating depending on what kind of meditation you do. But for me, Vipassana was definitely that. I was just like deep in my freeze pattern and it was not helping me. And all of this also has to do with the right tool at the right stage of healing. Like I tell everyone, all my work is about differentiation. So I have my opinion. I have my experience. I'm not saying that it's anyone else's. You have to take what makes sense for you. But, so in the ice, I realized, okay, I am really good at getting in there and tolerating. I felt exactly like I did when I gave birth. I went in and I just like set my mind. It's like I set the metronome at one beat and I just locked myself into it. But afterwards, I missed the social engagement part. I didn't enjoy it. So I thought, okay, now I'm going to go to the ice and see if I can enjoy it and see if I can like open my heart. Oops, nope, that became very painful. So I was like, okay, that doesn't work. Then I decided what I need to do is go in intervals. So go in, let's say 2 minutes, get out and warm myself up because the sympathetic system is what warms you up. Very easy for me to tolerate cold, very hard for me to warm myself back up.
Interesting.
So I have to practice warming up rather than tolerating. But someone who's really sympathetic, those people get in and they just want to like jump right out. I've seen it. I've seen someone actually get in and like fling right out.
Okay, so are you saying for someone who's sympathetically aroused on the high end, and that's kind of their normal state, are you saying getting an ice would be good for them?
It could be.
What's another thing that could be good for someone who finds themselves kind of anxious and kind of up a lot with lots of energy, and they don't have a hard time mobilizing? What's good for them? What's one thing they can do?
I mean, those are a lot of the types that are in WIM, so I can't say specifically if I know if that's good for them, but those are a lot of people are getting a lot out of that in that practice. But I would say more things that are like down regulating, like yin yoga and the cold, like getting in there and learning to basically what it's doing, I think, is it's amplifying even higher the sympathetic charge and in putting you in a situation where you have to work a little bit harder to bring yourself back down. But it's only a 2-minute cycle. So it's pretty doable to work with your mind in that way. Cool. Have you done it?
I mean, no, No, I've never gotten in ice. And I've jumped in lakes, mountain lakes, and cold showers, but not the full ice bathtub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even like, did you ever like swim in winter in Utah?
No.
No. Okay.
No. Yeah. Snow angels with clothes on.
Naked snow angels. Then we're in business.
Yeah. All right. As we wind down, at the risk of like stirring the pot a little more here, you said something about the MeToo movement and sort of women and the nervous system and men. And will you just kind of bring us into where you've come with that? Because I remember seeing you on Facebook, extremely active around the MeToo stuff, and I'm just appreciating your maybe alternative take at this conversation. And just I'd love you to share, maybe a high level something about that based on the work you do also with women. So
2 things about that. One is that what happened in Me Too was we had this mass unshaming, right? Everyone is welcome to come and tell their story. And a lot of people, I'm sure all therapists are just like holding their breath because people are sharing things and disclosing in ways that they don't really have a container to, it is a lot for a lot of people. Hearing other people's stories, sharing their own, reflecting on their whole lives. I had a lot of men call me up and say, I'm remembering things that I hadn't remembered, and I'm wondering if I did the right thing. And, they're going through their own process about their own behavior, which I was really happy about because, so we had this mass unshaming. And my opinion is that we live in a culture that is highly geared towards a victim mentality right now. And people will totally fight me on that and say, no, we always blame the victim. I don't agree. I think we live right now, it's a race to the victim position. And white men are at the top of the bad hierarchy. And then it just kind of goes from there to who gets to be the biggest victim and who has the least amount of privilege. Okay. The other thing that happened is that we threw everything in the same basket. So somebody who got catcalled is in the same basket as someone who had 5 years of childhood sexual abuse with their parent or something, which as clinicians, we know are completely different things, right? There's totally different nervous system wiring that happens in the situations. Additionally to that, we didn't really leave any room for the fact that, like, I, for instance, like to be catcalled. So that's not a problem for me. I enjoy that kind of polarity. I find it strange to live in a culture where most men are now afraid to approach and kind of sitting on their hands and don't know how to move because they're afraid to be offensive. They're afraid to be in the predator role.
Yep.
And so the point of it is that we don't live in a utopia. We live in the natural world. We live in a world where animals kill one another. We will never live in a world where there's not a power dynamic, period.
Yeah.
I think the positive part of Porges's work and what I've really been grinding on with this book, and I don't know exactly where I stand on it yet, but I think that there is the possibility that we have, until up to this point, we have said that humans are like a plague to the planet, right? That we're like destroying the planet. We're the enemy of the planet. And it's normal because we're, at the top of the chain, we think, at least. I think that what polyvagal theory is potentially saying is that we're way more wired towards collaboration and connection than we are towards predation. It's at least an interesting thing to think about, to not already take for granted that we're a terrible species.
Yeah.
Because that is kind of the dominant narrative if you talk about environmental science or, all of the other ways that we're ruining things. And a friend of mine is in high school in New York, and she was talking about how, what did she call it? Environmental trauma? No, global warming trauma. I don't know. Some kind of new trauma that apparently teenagers have because they're inundated with the global warming thing, and it's giving them an impending sense of disaster. Not helpful.
Yeah.
It's not helpful.
Right. Promotes this victim consciousness kind of. Yeah.
Promotes victim consciousness. If we're going to go to, we've already gone to the moon. I mean, that's insane. That's insane that we figured out how to go to the moon. Insanity. And now apparently Mars. Like, for sure we can figure out how to deal with some plastics that are floating in the ocean if we direct our attention there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see how that couldn't happen. But the point is, I don't want women to wait until laws change, until men somehow, I'm giving women skills to know how to track their nervous system and communicate from that place, because none of us get this training in school.
Yeah.
Zero people, or maybe 10 people, or you're starting to teach it in schools now. It's maybe going to start happening more, but we can't expect, like the Aziz Ansari case. I've read that thing and I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, how is someone else supposed to know if you're in a freeze state? And this whole thing about enthusiastic yes, like that's so unrealistic to how sexual encounters actually go.
Yeah.
So, are those maybe ideals to work towards, where men could recognize a nervous system state and name that for someone else? Potentially. But as women, we have to do it for ourselves. We have to be able to say, I'm not comfortable with this. And I'm not blaming victims. I'm not saying you could call me a victim if you want. But what I'm saying is that we have tools, and it's another level of self-infantilization as women, to think that men, like father, dad, God, should be different. Government should be taking care of us, rather than, no, we can do this. And so let's do this. And my experience across the board with the women I've worked with, and now we're in like the thousands, like 3,000, 4,000, whatever. The men are so receptive. The men are standing there, like, basically just like, please just tell me what to do. And not just so I can get what I want, because I really want to be with you. I really want to understand what's going on. I really want to help. And when women can say, I want to connect, or I feel this way, or here's what will work for me, a lot changes. Yeah. And even I just teach women sensation language. Right now, I'm feeling a little sweaty along my diaphragm. I feel a little heat in the back of my head, between my shoulder blades, and when they start communicating that way, they don't tell their partner, now I'm trying something different, although you could. Their partner just starts reciprocating and communicating back. The same thing I found with pausing, which is like my number one tool for everything, including sex. Like, learn how to pause instead of stop. Learn that pausing doesn't mean game over. Yep. It's just pausing and being in the pause.
Nice.
And when people pause, what happens is then men start asking for pauses, and the women are like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean pause? Like, I'm supposed to get this whenever I want. Or the old, limp dick phenomenon. It's like all of a sudden women think that if a guy's not hard, that's also means something about them, and that they should have done something differently, and that something's going wrong. It's like just a variation on everything in the spectrum of what might happen.
Yeah. So I'm hearing, there's a lot of good stuff in here. I'm hearing about the nervous system. Like, what I'm really getting about you, Kimberly, is this real amazing way you empower women through their nervous system, right? Kind of bottom up, to own their own body and space in a way that they haven't before, rather than expecting the outside to behave differently. Yeah. And it seems like women would be, the only thing they'd be up against, besides obviously all the social shit and all the political stuff and the patriarchy and whatever thing you want to put on there, is just their own nervous system and the intelligence of arousal and threat response. When I, on a neuroceptive level, if I see your face look a certain way, I can't really stop my reactivity to that. It's just like so automatic, right? But I can start to take command of when it happens, because it's happening in nanoseconds. Can I start to do something about my upset or my activation? Is that kind of what you're saying?
You can, you could also start, if it's a habitual thing, like for instance, every time your husband gives you the quote unquote look, you start to shut down and retract. You could start to notice what happens before that. But you can also, like, one thing that I absolutely loved was, like, I had a couple that I was working with. He was like caveman, like, just full on like hunter, like so hyper masculine and really sympathetically wired. Yeah. She was like an artist, and she'd always had kind of artistic boyfriends who were like real soft. And so his level of charge just polarized her into that kind of like, I can't do it. And their first sexual experiences together as a couple were not good, but they didn't even really recognize it until later because both of them were in a habit. She'd had a lot of sex where she was drunk or high. And so, and like a lot of kind of unwanted experiences in that state. So she had a lot of dissociative stuff. So she took my course. She's in the middle of it. And they started kissing. And like when a certain amount of activation came up, she started to feel herself freezing and she started to feel herself about to cry. And she was just like, fuck this. Like, I am so sick of this. I'm so sick of doing this because she's crazy about her husband. And, you know, it's been years of this now. They've had a kid and it's, you know, it's been like 4 years where every part of their relationship is fantastic, but the sex is the thing that they just cannot figure out.
Yeah.
So she gets out of bed and she starts like jumping around. And then her husband gets out of bed and like, I think faces off with her and also starts like bouncing around. And then she just started making noises and like grunting and growling and moving. And he started doing it back, you know, to her. And then that was it. And then they got in bed and they didn't go have sex and it wasn't some miracle cure. It was just like, they did something different and they did it together.
Yeah.
And so she had the safety of like, okay, my partner's in this together with me. It's not because a lot of times the sexual stuff also becomes like one person's problem. Oh, that's the damaged person. And so everything, no, this is a thing that both people are a part of and both people need to work on. So like, I considered that a huge victory because it was just, it was like a something different.
Yeah.
Not just, oh, you're going to lie there and cry. And then I'm going to lie here and feel bad because I have an erection and I'm into you. And, you know, and I'm going to spin downward into my shame space because I want sex so much more than you do. And then we're both going to project about the future of our relationship and how this can never work. You know, it's so real. Yeah. And, so I think it's so useful to, some of these things, they happen quicker than we realize and they spring up on us. But the great thing is they're happening all day long. So it's not, I say, it's like, it's not capital T trauma, you know, it's like little t. Like the other day, I scheduled a massage. I was in the writing flow of my class and I'm like, I can't go. Like, I just can't go right now. I need to finish what I'm doing. So I called up like 3 hours ahead of time and the lady was like, she wouldn't stop talking. She was like, it is all my fault. I have not taken your credit card. You know, you have to da-da-da. And like, there was no space for me to say like, I'm happy to pay for this, you know, because I wasn't going to just bail. Like I was calling and I just recognized, wow, I ended up hanging up on her because I was just like, there's no room for me to come forward in this discussion. And like, I feel like you're already assuming I'm not going to do what you want me to do, which isn't even true. And so forget it. So that was like my flight response, right? Avoidance, just drop it. Yeah. And so we have these mini experiences all the time that are opportunities to repair. So then that big thing that we're avoiding that we think is so unlovable or impenetrable or makes us the least available doesn't seem so big anymore because we're doing those small repairs all the time.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Awesome, Kimberly. Parting words before we share people where they can find out about you and your work and your classes. So just maybe last thoughts for the listener here.
I just think we can really do this, you know, like I think that together we can really create this new world that we want where there's a lot of mutual respect and there's a lot of kindness. And I'm so excited for our kids. Yeah. You know, Cece's turning 12 and I already hear her talking to her friends and hear her. She was on my podcast because she had a really weird day of sex ed at school. And it was so different than everything that she's been around with me. And she wanted to talk about it. So I really feel like this change that we want, that the MeToo was like, you know, the first sort of clumsy move towards is there. If we are willing to not polarize at every potential moment. So if we're willing to listen to people without filtering everything they say as a potential affront to us. And if we're willing to not go into generalizations about men do this and women do this, if we're willing to even something as really profoundly disturbing as like what happened with Michael Jackson, if we're willing to just allow for the fact that like people can be really incredible and have really incredible shadows at the same time.
Yeah.
And I don't believe anyone is a rapist. I believe that people commit rape. I don't believe anyone is just an abuser. Maybe I do. Okay, 5% of people. But the way that we're structuring things is this, is like 99% of people are potential dangers, rather than actually like 80% of people are potential allies.
Yeah.
If we can learn how to communicate and really listen to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that I also want to encourage people who are in positions of privilege, if you're white, if you're male, or whatever that is, to understand that really what's happening is we are all in freeze states, because men are being told, like, just sit down and shut up and just listen. But at the same time, well, where are all the men talking about this and talking about that, right? And the same thing just goes down the line. So part of, like, I'm hoping that as I empower women, which in turn empowers their relationships and their children, that makes them more activists. But the thing is, most women go towards activism from a victim position.
Yeah.
And I was like that. I was like,
it's harder to hear, right?
All underdogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that activism can come from a place where you don't have to be smaller. You don't have to shrink. Your arousal doesn't have to be less. You don't have to take up less space. You can be who you are and make space for other people.
Yeah.
And I think that is the future that we're heading towards. But there is a lot of attention that we need to place on restoring these skills and giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. Thanks for the heavy dose of optimism here. It's really refreshing. Where can we find out about you and your work?
My website is magamama.com, MAGAMAMA.com. Pretty active over on Instagram at magamamas, MAGAMAMAS. There's like magamama.com/trauma-transcendence. There's a free 1-hour class specifically on trauma and transcendence, which is the opposite side of trauma. And I'm teaching regular. I teach Jaguar 3 times a year. My books, it's probably around here somewhere, is available on everywhere. Amazon, Shambhala. Yeah, the fourth trimester. And I'm pretty active on social media, but right now my book's due soon, so I'm writing the book more than I'm writing on social media.
Well, thank you, because we want your book. We want your next book, because you're going to help a lot of us. Cool. Thanks so much, Kimberly. Wonderful to see you and hang out with you.
Thank you.
Holy shit, huh? That was a big one. Lots of edgy, vulnerable truth-telling here, and incredibly helpful stuff. I hope you got something out of this. Take some breaths and go to magamama.com, magamama.com. That's Kimberly's website. You can check out her podcast. My wife, Ellen's been interviewed there. And she's all about, again, women, clearly, motherhood, healing from postpartum injury or just, strain, stress, trauma, etc. Sexuality, reclaiming your feminine power by getting a handle on your nervous system. Really cool stuff. And your action step, all right? Out of everything Kimberly said, I want you to write down, here's the top number one takeaway I learned from this episode. Just write that down. Here is the number one thing I learned from this episode about myself or about women. That's good. That's okay. You make it more personal when you integrate it better if you make it about you and your life. How does this apply to my life? Okay, second step of our action step that we've added is share it with someone. Okay, share it with a close friend, a partner, and just let them into your world, into your inner life. We practice intimacy here at the Relationship School. Esther Perel often says, it's into me I see. And it's a way to look into someone, look into each other. Yeah. Practice intimacy, please. The world's going to be a better place if you get real. Just get real with one other person. Like Kimberly's getting real, right? Modeling the way here. Get real. Take notes from Kimberly's way and her story. I mean, dude, her story. Wow. Holy shite. I love hearing about people's stories. And she's got a really cool, like so many layers story. And I've been hearing parts of her story for years at our house when she would come by to see my wife occasionally. So it's just, anyway, it's so cool. So thanks, Kimberly, again. And shout out to all you women out there who are healing your bodies post-sexual trauma, post-birth, post-pain, post-whatever you've gone through. Thanks for doing the work and being the kind of woman that wants to grow and awaken through your pain. Yeah. Major respect. Okay. As always, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts. We're now on Google Play and Spotify. So make sure you subscribe so you get the weekly updates. It's a text message or whatever it is that says, hey, new episode's out. All right. If you feel extra courageous, leave us a review on iTunes. Share on Instagram, social media. Share in your stories, Instagram stories. I love it when people ping me on Instagram. I'm at Jason Gaddis on something you got out of this podcast. Okay. Share there. So lots of options here for you to keep engaging with us. All right. Okay, everybody. Thanks and talk soon. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Relationship School fans and Smart Couple listeners, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. All right. Do us a favor, subscribe, share one of these videos with a friend. All right. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships. And you are one of them. So thank you.